Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, the cherished sequel to the outstanding Paper Mario. The Thousand-Year Door focuses a lot more on its storytelling and combat mechanics. This decision really paid off. These qualities are an impressive upgrade over the original, being a lot more extensive and fleshed out. Unfortunately, this new focus has caused some other important aspects to fall to the wayside. I've always held the original Paper Mario and The Thousand-Year Door up high as some of my favorite games, but I've often had a hard time deciding which I preferred. After my most recent playthroughs of both of these titles, I can now confidently say I prefer the original Paper Mario. And it's not a difficult decision. That's not to say The Thousand-Year Door isn't loaded with excellent features, and even improvements over the first, but its flaws are more evident to me than ever. Get ready for a lot of comparisons between the first two Paper Mario titles. In this video, I'm going to lay out what I found to be the best and the worst aspects of this game. Be warned that full spoilers for Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door are on the table. The best. Number 1, expanded storytelling. The original Paper Mario's narrative is endearing, quirky, and an overall good time, but when you break it down, it's an RPG iteration of a typical Mario plot, and therefore kind of basic. Little in that story manages to resonate on an emotional level. Thankfully, a story to care about and get invested in is the greatest strength of The Thousand-Year Door. This narrative is brimming with creativity, unpredictability, and mystery, and it's not afraid to tackle dark or somber subjects. It still hosts to plenty of cliches. The quest for the Crystal Stars is a standard setup for the genre, but it's remarkable how consistently inspired it is despite that. Bowser isn't even the main antagonist in this game. In fact, you even play as him briefly after each chapter just to see what he's doing. Peach is kidnapped by a new group of villains, one with unknown ambitions who actually feel like they need to be stopped. Partners are a big step up in complexity, most of which have backstories with good reasons to join Mario's journey, and they're not afraid to share their own unique thoughts either. They are a much more felt, present part of the adventure because of this, Vivian and Admiral Bobbery easily being the biggest highlights. Ultimately, these are still simple characters, but you bond with them, and their fantastically well-crafted designs solidly secure them as icons of the series. Believable describes many of the NPCs as well, and this really allows the player to be drawn into their stories. The writing deserves a lot of credit here. Talk about personality. This game doesn't lack for strong identities or humorous scenes. Even random NPCs often have something amusing to say. Plot points are always direct and clear. Situations are easy to relate and get into because motivations and goals are understandable. It's effortlessly entertaining, with an appreciated balance between serious and lighthearted moments. This is an absorbing, fulfilling story all the way to the end of the game, so it's no wonder it's held in such a special place for so many players today. Number 2, concepts and unpredictability. Every new chapter in The Thousand-Year Door is exciting because you never know what it has in store. Each one's different from the last, with new themes and concepts, so it's always fresh and engaging. While some chapter scenarios follow a conventional formula, most of the time you're met with completely unexpected set pieces. The Boggly Woods is a great example, with a black and white, dreamlike aesthetic that's wholly unique. Rogueport, the hub town, is a novel place for a hub considering it's a rundown port of thieves and slackers. Twilight Town has a spectacular spookiness and creepy NPCs, but the originality goes far beyond the visuals in a lot of these places. When you arrive here, the residents are being turned into pigs whenever the bell chimes, and once you deal with the monster responsible, you realize he transformed you into a shadow and stole your entire identity. Glitzville and the Excess Express are by far the most impressive chapters conceptually. Glitzville is a glamorous place in the clouds home to a fighting arena Mario must battle his way through to claim the Crystal Star, all the while discovering the shady underside behind the scenes of missing fighters and dangerous threats. The Excess Express is a 3-day train ride of solving various mysteries, an awesome motif taken on its own, and even better when the train is ultimately taken over by a mass of bizarre little creatures. Surprising things are constant even on a small smaller scale. You'll be off exploring some ruins and all of a sudden you're on a game show. A boss that's losing will offer to let you sniff their feet, and there's even an option for maybe just a quick sniff. A ghost who lost his diary will ask you to bring it to him and literally throw a game over at you if you take a peek. And this is totally fair game. He gives you more than enough warning not to look. You even play as an invisible Peach sneaking around the villain base, and jump through some classic Mario-style levels as Bowser. This game is a heck of a lot wackier than anything in the first. Making such a strong impression, tons of its moments will linger in memory. Number 3, world building. Like its predecessor, the Thousand Year Door fleshes out the Mario universe beautifully. Various characters and classic enemies of the series are convincing NPCs again, with even bolder designs and originality. They're a lot more integrated into the world too. Boos are in the shops, Bob-ombs and Toads are working at the port, bandits are in the alleyways waiting to rob the next person who walks by. Seeing these authentic environments where the creatures of the Mario world live is such a blast. Being a sequel, there are a lot of references to things from the first game too. Characters and locations are often name-dropped. Bowser's hanging out with Kammy Koopa again, and you can even meet up with one of the partners from the first game. This acknowledgement of the previous title is an incredible rarity for the Mario series, and does a lot to help the world feel more alive. Characters feel like they exist outside of Mario's story too. We've already brought up Peach and Bowser's exploits, but Peach in particular has a really great showing in this one. Her relationship with Tech is one of the most heartfelt parts of the game. It's a very well-paced sequence, authentic enough to actually get you to care. Things like catching Miss Mouse, hunting down badges, Dupless joining up with the Shadow Sirens, and of course Luigi's entirely separate adventure told through his own long-winded rants and novelization really sell the idea of a living, breathing world where people are doing things whether you're present or not. It's so much fun to be a part of, and shows that the Mario universe can be a lot deeper than it's usually portrayed. There's even some thoughtful lore to discover, showing a surprisingly unexpected level of consideration and history to this game's world. Even the crazy black chests that curse you with paper power-ups have a backstory. There's a lot of magic to this land. It's one of the most lively, fleshed out Mario worlds ever expressed, and the new depth to the writing helps it surpass the first game in this regard. That's not to say the actual level design is equally impressive, which is an important distinction to make that I'll get into more later. Number 4, expanded combat. The Thousand Year Door takes the original Paper Mario's simple battle system and adds just the right amount of changes to supplement it while still maintaining that simplicity. There's a lot more to consider now when battling, but it never becomes too overwhelming. Action commands are still a great aspect to the system, but there are even invisible, stylish commands you can now input for extra flair and star energy. Super Guarding can mitigate all damage and counterattack if you're good at the timing, creating a risk-reward option for defensive play. Partners now have their own HP. Badges have been greatly expanded upon, supporting a lot of variety in how you want to augment your abilities. And there's even an audience now that watches your battles who can interact with the fight in minor ways. This stage provides the perfect amount of nuance to battles, framing them in an attractive, energizing way, ensuring each one's a spectacle. It's quick to get in and out of battle, and leveling up is still very rewarding. Star powers are still very strong abilities, but there has been some attempt at balancing them. Since it's no longer free to restore your star energy, and the fact that these moves actually require inputs for the best results, the player's far less inclined to rely on them because they're not always cost-effective. It's good that there's incentive to be more considerate with your resources. Strategy feels a lot more supported and present compared to the first game, but the low difficulty level of most enemies means it's easy to become overpowered. Utilizing all of the new options at your disposal unfortunately leaves you with a very brain-dead experience that only really gets challenging in the final chapter, but I'll get into this more later. At the very least, the Pit of 100 Trials is a great inclusion. It's a memorable challenge that rewards knowledge of the combat system. Number 5, the Shadow Queen. I, like me, a freaky, dark, crazy-looking evil demon, and dang, the Shadow Queen is freaking sick. What a cool design. Look at this malevolent majesty. Talk about a payoff to the story. You know an evil demon is going to be resurrected, but what a way to go with it. I mean, come on, she one-shots the primary antagonist for trying to tell her what to do. After she's revealed, you're shown multiple multiple scenes of the land getting covered in dark skies, and these really help her appearance feel impactful and large-scale. This queen needs to be dealt with. Her very existence is already influencing the world in a bad way. We've already established just how awesome she looks, but this is also the most challenging fight in the game, and really satisfying strategically. It has a great music track, and shadow hands that literally pull the audience into darkness to absorb their souls and max out her health. Good fricking god. Talk about the coolest move in the whole game. And there's already one where the audience is shot out of a machine gun. Finales in RPGs are hard to land in my opinion, but man did they nail it with this one. Shout out to the cheesy scenes of your friends yelling words of encouragement to you during an emotionally uplifting melody. This is typical RPG garbage nonsense that I'd normally hate, but when it's done well, it's done well. So hats off to it. And that about covers the best qualities of the Thousand Year Door. Though it's worth mentioning the addition of these logs to keep track of tattles, badges, and recipes. These are a great idea, and it's a lot of fun to fill them up. So where does that leave us now? I've gushed quite a lot about the story and combat, but what about the rest of the game? Like I said earlier, the flaws of the Thousand Year Door are more noticeable than ever to me, and while there's still plenty to appreciate here, there are quite a few other aspects I don't appreciate so much. The worst. Number 1, level design. Despite my praises of this game's world building, area design has been so greatly reduced it barely feels like an interconnected world anymore. In all fairness, there are plenty of areas in the original Paper Mario that are essentially long hallways, but that's not all that game was. It had plenty of sprawling areas, and nearly every chapter had its own thoroughly designed dungeon. These left-to-right pathways follow a very strict format, and since they make up most of the game, locations tend to feel very samey. Like I said, hallways. Rarely do you ever head north or south anymore, and even when something's in the distance, you just end up entering the background to get there. While that's cute the first time, it harms the feeling of walking through a real environment. Everything feels segmented and connected in unnatural ways. Not a single chapter is entered by leaving Rogueport on foot. It's all pipes and forms of travel that get you to your destinations. But again, because of that, areas feel disconnected, like you're jumping around video game levels. I miss the feeling of a natural, realistic world, an aspect the original Paper Mario does really well. This game feels like it wants to be a pop-up book, but because it's framed this way, the poor level design and ample backtracking couldn't be more noticeable. Comparing the jungle from each game's Chapter 5, the difference is clear as day. Jade Jungle is one of the larger areas in the first game, with tons of things to interact with, and a non-linear progression when searching for the Yoshi kids. Keelhaul Key's jungle in this game is a handful of small rectangles that take about 3 minutes to fully explore with almost nothing notable about them, and most of your time is spent reading. It doesn't feel at all like exploring a jungle in the Thousand Year Door. It's just too small and empty. Even most of the left to right hallways of the first game had a lot more going on, like Shy Guy's Toy Box, Mount Rugged, and even Flower Fields. This game is barely host to intricate areas, and puzzles are mostly confined to a single room, though I will give credit to the X-Naut Fortress as probably the best example of a more substantial location. Going through these areas just feels tedious. Half the time, they're claustrophobic hallways with enemies and the occasional invisible block. You're always being railroaded to the next stop, which brings me to number 2, interruptions and pacing. Despite my praises of this game's dialogue, man is it obsessed with itself. Hope you like reading because you'll spend about 70% of this game doing that. This is good writing, like I said before, and I wouldn't have an issue with it if it wasn't so relentless. The balance of exploration to reading text is just so one-sided, and some of the chapter scenarios are almost nothing but dialogue. I wish there was more consideration to pacing and player interactivity. Comparing the fortresses from each game's Chapter 1, you can see the difference. The Koopa Brothers have scenes, but they're only a few lines, and they make their point quickly. Hooktail Castle, on the other hand, has multiple long-winded rants introducing concepts and characters that keep breaking up the momentum. I found myself taking a lot more breaks playing the Thousand Year Door, because the unrelenting text was just so draining. It could be trimmed down quite a bit without sacrificing its character, but it wouldn't need to be if in-between areas had more substantial exploration. It doesn't help that the Thousand Year Door isn't afraid to waste its words and the player's time, ultimately for the sake of a joke. Time wasting is a common occurrence in this game, and that leads me to number 3, backtracking and padding. Nearly every chapter in the Thousand Year Door has a tedious aspect to it, something that seems to only be there to make it last longer. Whether it's escorting punies, grinding out battles, or backtracking through the same areas, this game is packed with tedium. Chapters 2, 4, and 5 have a lot of retreading, with 4 being the most egregious. Enemies respawn easily as well. You can be sure they'll always be ready for your next trip, and since many of them are difficult to avoid in such small hallways, you'll likely have to fight some of them every time. This is clear padding that makes the running around feel even worse. General White is the other infamous aspect of this game, and yeah, no kidding. You have to find him in Chapter 7 by meticulously traveling to pretty much every major location in the game just to be told he's gone off somewhere else. Eventually you find him back where you started the search, only to have to mash through empty text trying to wake him up because he's a deep sleeper. Big no to all of this. This is a huge waste of time under the guise of, isn't it funny how annoying it is? But it offers nothing beyond that, and is blatantly at the expense of the player's time. The Thousand Year Door seems to revel in having you run around incessantly, and nowhere is this truer than the Trouble Center. The idea of a place to pick up side quests is a good one, but its execution is absolutely dismal. First, you can only accept one trouble at a time, for really no good reason other than adding to the playtime. And second, you have no way of knowing what the reward will be until you complete the request. And wouldn't you know it, tons of these have trash rewards completely not worth it upon completion. It doesn't help that none of them are compelling. Nearly every trouble is a runaround fetch quest. Outside of the one that recruits the partner, Miss Mouse, which makes you go all the way back to the top of Hooktail's castle, by the way, I wouldn't recommend doing any of these in a casual playthrough. They're just not worth the effort. Here's an example of an awful trouble request. Bub-ulber. This little guy wants a hot dog, which can only be bought in Glitzville, which he doesn't tell you until you meet him in person, even though he could have easily written that on the request slip. Regardless, after meeting him, you leave Petalburg, walk through Rogueport, board the blimp, and buy a hot dog. Then you head all the way back, only for him to say he now wants another hot dog. So unless you happen to buy 2, it's time to make that whole trip again. And wouldn't you know it, he's still not satisfied. Now he wants a moose cake, something you're unlikely to have handy, so you have to go back to Rogueport and cook one up for him. The kicker to all of this is, after he's finally gotten his cake, all you gain is the ability to exchange hot dogs for a worthless item used for bad cooking recipes. Holy shit. Oh, and I almost forgot. One of the troubles is tracking down and waking up General White again. Yup, absolute garbage. Number 4, difficulty balance. I touched upon this earlier, and it's easy to summarize. Combat difficulty isn't balanced well throughout the game. Utilizing badges, and especially the power lift ability, you'll absolutely shred through every major battle until the final chapter. I'm inclined to say the easy difficulty fits the style of this game, but it's a shame it has such deep combat possibilities when only the Pit of 100 Trials and a few endgame bosses really ask for them. A lot of other boss fights would be a lot more interesting if they weren't such pushovers. I mean, come on, I beat Smorg, the boss of Chapter 6, in 3 turns. Puzzles could also use a higher level of complexity. Similar to the first game, partner abilities are very rudimentary, and rarely ask for much thought. It's almost always use the partner on the thing they're used for. These aren't a big deal or anything, but a more considerate difficulty balance would help fights and puzzles feel more compelling and rewarding to overcome. Number 5, the Pianta Parlor. Another very simple point, the Pianta Parlor is a pretty trash video game casino. It has ugly visuals, an unpleasant soundtrack, frustrating minigames with terrible payouts, and rewards so overpriced you're better off just buying the tokens outright. Also, really with taking and returning my tokens every time I enter and leave this place, just let them exist as another currency. Yeah, this casino sucks. And look at that, we're done. The Thousand Year Door's problems are so intricately woven throughout the game, it's hard to discuss it without having to bring them up. Quite the difference from the original Paper Mario, where I barely had any significant problems. It's likely clear by now that I don't hold the Thousand Year Door up as highly as I used to. I might even prefer some of the more recent titles. At least they offer more substantial sections of unbroken gameplay. It's easy to become so enamored with the Thousand Year Door's story and spectacle that its flaws fail to stand out. That says something about just how captivating this game can be, but I do wish it carried on the balance the original game struck so well. Despite my criticisms, the Thousand Year Door is a magical adventure worth experiencing. When its creativity shines, it really shines, presenting a Mario world unlike any other, so I'm not surprised that it's stuck with and won the hearts of so many players. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked my videos, subscribe and check out my Patreon. I'll see you next time.